On your feet if you're at home. Put your hands together for the president and founder of the National Action Network, the Reverend Dr. Al Sharpton.
No justice.
No peace.
No justice.
No peace.
No justice.
No peace.
No justice.
No peace.
What do we want?
Justice.
What do we want?
Justice.
What do we want?
Justice.
When do we want it?
Now.
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 Fist bump the person next to you. Tell them you love them.
Never give up and never give in. Change will come. Keep faith down with it. Troubles and trials will last always. With God on our side, let me provide. Hold on, be strong. A better day is coming and it won't be too long. Yeah, change will come. Change will come. Change will come. Your change will come. Your change will come. Your change will come. Your change will come. Never give up and never give in. Your change will come. Keep faith down within. Troubles and trials won't last always. With God on our side, nothing but pride. Hold on, be strong. A better day is coming and it won't be too long. Yeah, change will come. Change will come. Change will come. Oh, your change will come. Your change is gonna come. I know it will. Your change will come. Your change is gonna come. Your change will come. Oh, your change is gonna come. Oh, change will come. Oh, change will come. Change will come.
Many years ago, a man and a husband and a wife came to Harlem, and it was a time that people were trying to own and operate their own businesses. They opened a little counter restaurant on 7th Avenue. Only had a little counter, and people would come, but sometimes you got to use what you got to get what you want. And they knew how to cook, and they knew how to cook better than most. And they started on that little counter building a soul food restaurant. And it blew up so they could move up the block, and they kept moving. And now, 60 years later, presidents and presidential candidates and mayors comes to Sylvia Woods Restaurant. They do stories in magazines and profiles on television. They had no idea when they were coming from South Carolina that they would become one of the tourist spots in what was the great era of Harlem that they're trying to bring down. But the one thing they won't move is what that little black woman, Sylvia Woods, and her husband did on that corner. I remember the night that I brought President Barack Obama there, and he hugged Sylvia. Even he knew of her, even because he had gone to school here in New York. And she said, I never thought the soon-to-be President Obama would know who I was, but if you hold on, even if you don't have nothing but collard greens and rice, your change will come.
Your change will come. Your change is gonna come. Oh, yes, it will. Your change will come. Your change
Many of you know that a man that became like a father to me, my father left when I was young. A man that became like a father to me was the godfather of Soul James Brown. And I remember in the late 70s, James Brown, like many artists, got into serious tax trouble. When you come out of forced segregation and forced situations where you don't have the management skills that others have, you're going to run into problems. And I remember I would go down in the late 70s and he'd be fighting the tax people and be always, they'd put a lien on this and a lien on that and try to take his cars, and we'd be fighting with them and working out payment plans. But about 2 years after he died, I was riding with his daughters. We were going to an event to memorialize him, and I touched Deanna and said, "Look at there." And she said, "What?" I said, "You didn't realize this. You didn't tell me this. We talk often." She said, "I didn't tell you what, Reverend?" I said, "The internal revenue in Augusta, Georgia, is now on James Brown Boulevard." They had changed the name of the street in honor of James Brown. I went there to unveil the statue when he was alive. But who would have ever thought when they was harassing him and hunting him down, that one day everybody in Augusta that paid their taxes had to send the envelope to the street named after James Brown. If you keep on going, your change will come.
Your change will come. Your change is gonna come. Do you believe it? Your change will come. Oh, your change is gonna come. Oh, change will come. Oh, change will come. Change will
National Action Network Change Ensemble. Give them a big hand. Give them a big hand. Certainly we're happy to be with you another Saturday morning for the Saturday Action Rally. For you that are here in the House of Justice, 106 West 145th Street in the village of Harlem. And for you that are listening live on 1190 WLIB AM in New York, and for you that are watching us on various platforms, we're happy to be with you another Saturday morning to give our report on where the action is. Give a hand to our presider, Attorney Michael Hardy. Our musical director, Minister Tyrone Richardson. And if you don't mind, give him a drummer some. Give Brother Chris some. Certainly, we're very honored and happy to have with us this morning State Senator Kevin Parker. Give him another hand. And I've known Kevin Parker, we go back decades. And he's always been one that would stand up with us and for his community. And I was glad this morning as he ran down some of the legislative challenges and victories in Albany that we must continue. Let me tell you something. Too many of us have a minority complex. So when he was talking about when he went into the state senate and he said one day they would be the majority, it was laughed at. What is worse than being in the minority is to be in the majority with a minority complex. Worse than slavery, it was bad enough we were enslaved. What's worse is we adjusted to being slaves. Once somebody can make you comfortable with being a minority, with being less, then that's on you. There were some folk after they won the Civil Rights Act still wouldn't sat in the back of the bus. Let's welcome our Impact TV family joining us around the country. So one of the things that I felt that was so important about what Senator Parker is saying with the New York State Senate and with our Majority Leader, Senator Andrea Cousin Stewart, who is often here when she can, is they are not only in the majority, but they're behaving in a majority way, which has reformed some of the criminal justice, even taken flack. And let me tell you something, nobody has shown stronger leadership in my lifetime than Andrea Stewart Cousins up in Albany. Now, it is popular to beat up on politicians, and it's very easy. That's an easy, cheap shot that you always can take shot at. They ain't doing nothing. Folk call all the time, I'm not voting because they ain't doing nothing. Well, first of all, you ain't doing nothing if you ain't voting. Let's start with who ain't doing nothing. They ain't doing nothing, so you gonna match them and do nothing. And that makes sense to you. How is anybody that you claim gonna do something if you don't vote to get them in? And let me tell you something else, folks that are against your interests are not mad at you for not voting, they glad. Because they can keep putting in folk that will put in legislation that is against your interest. All this money they spending to try and stop you from voting. All of these tricks they're trying with legislators all over the country to change voting laws. And you're gonna get up and volunteer. You ain't gotta do no trick for me, I'm gonna trick myself. That's why when Senator Parker was running down, these things affect folks' lives, the legislation they pass, and what is important. So I want to thank him for coming and giving us that. I thank him for his leadership and his diligence. Give another hand, Senator Kevin Parker. And he won his primary the other night. And I also want to thank Reverend Cooper, Reverend Julian La Rosa Cooper, who gave us our inspirational words, St. James Church. And the reason I came out late is I was listening to him. About 3 folk I had to call and tell him I got to let you go. He told me what to do. I was in the back dialing about 3 folk I knew. Any preacher can go from St. Paul to Teddy Pendergrass, know what he's doing. Give him another hand, Reverend Cooper. Let me say, first and foremost, tomorrow is the 59th anniversary of the March on Washington. 59 years ago tomorrow, 250,000 people went to Washington to protest for jobs and justice. Most years, this organization joins Martin Luther King III and have a commemoration in Washington every 3 or 4 years. Last one we did was in 2020, and Ashley, my daughter and I was talking about it last night, with a lot of people, Senator Parker, don't realize we put 200,000 people, that picture up there, National Geographic, did it as the photo of the year. We put 200,000 people there, August 28th, 2020. George Floyd's family, Breonna Taylor's family, all of them there, in the middle of a pandemic. Everybody told us, don't do it. You're going to have a super spreader. And somehow we just kept going. We spent tens of thousands of dollars getting the temperature checks and checked everybody coming in. People lined up blocks because we was trying everything to make sure it didn't spread. Didn't have a spreader and had 200,000 people there while Donald Trump was president. See, a lot of people forget this, Reverend Cooper. When they talk about Biden, and I'm going to get to that, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, all happened while Trump was president. Now, when they say to me, well, what is Biden doing? And I push him to do more. Nobody be on it more than me. But first of all, what did Trump even say about George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, or Breonna Taylor? So, I mean, how do you all of a sudden get so militant on Biden and you had laryngitis for 4 years while Trump was in? He said nothing. In fact, when they marched through Charlottesville, talking about you will not replace me, Jews will not replace me, he said it was fine people on both sides. I ain't talking about George Wallace in the 60s, I'm talking about right now. And you got some blacks who call on radio, some call my show, defending someone that never defended you. The whole world saw this policeman put his knee on George Floyd's neck. Trump didn't say a word. Not one word. Now, we went to Washington and commemorated. We started in the late 90s, every 2 or 3 years, Martin and all of us. And Martin III will be on my show this evening, 5 o'clock on MSNBC, Politics Nation with Al Sharpton, Kevin Parker's favorite show. He leaves a barbecue to go watch my show every Saturday and Sunday, 5 o'clock. Don't call him between 5 and 6. His assistant's here, she'll tell you, don't mess with him when Politics Nation's on. But a lot of us don't realize the environment that march occurred in. And one of the things that we're going to talk about today, Martin and I, is what is the state of the dream? Where are we 59 years later? And what is the state of the dream? Now, one of the reasons that it is important is in 1963. Let me explain this to you. People didn't go to Washington to have a bus outing. There was the call by A. Philip Randolph in the 30s and 40s to march on Washington. In 41, they were going to have a march on Washington. And President Franklin D. Roosevelt had a meeting with Randolph and said, if y'all call off the march, I will put an executive order out about segregation in the armed forces. Call it off. In the 50s, they had the 57 march. They called it a prayer pilgrimage in 1957. Then you got to 1963. It was because of the 55 Rosa Parks sitting on the front of the bus that led to the boycott, that then ignited a lot of movements around the country. Now, what folks don't know, that's why I'm so happy about our huddle group, because you got to teach young people the history. If you don't know the history and you are disconnected, you will not continue progress. History is built on continuity. When you hear Kevin talk about he used to work for Una and Carl McCauley, all of that is to glean knowledge. You can be the most talented person in the world. If you don't know what to do with your talent won't mean nothing. One of the tricks they do with us is they try to act like everybody ought to be brand new rather than a new manifestation of what traditions have worked in our community. Every major leader that we had came from a movement that taught them, and they recognized it. Dr. King used to talk about all the time Dr. Benjamin Mays and his daddy, Dr. Martin Luther King Sr. Malcolm X was mentored by Elijah Muhammad. Nobody don't come from nowhere. And anybody that act like they came from nowhere won't acknowledge it ain't gonna last, because you are not connected to nothing. I tell y'all that every week. Strength of a tree is its roots. I don't care how much they praise you. If you're not rooted in nothing, you won't last. Jesus. Reverend Cooper's talking about Jesus. God's son, those of us that believe in Jesus. He came and went and humbled himself to John the Baptist to be baptized. He didn't come and say, John the Baptist, old school, I'm the new thing, I'm the Messiah. He went and bowed to John the Baptist and then went up on the mountain of transfiguration and conferred with Moses and Elijah, because he said, I did not come to overturn the law of Moses, I came to fulfill it. So why are there, I hope some preachers watching me around the country, why do you think if Jesus didn't have to acknowledge others, why you got to be the new thing? I got something for you nobody ever had. Well, I don't need it. We need to do this because I'm the new young thing. Well, if all you got to sell is young, you ain't got nothing to sell. Youth is not an achievement. It's a situation. Young just mean you was born last. You ain't done nothing to be young. But if you are wise, you will use your youth to learn from the old, to know what to do with your youthful energy. I went this week. We honored Reverend Bishop Bernard Alexander. And it was the night before primary, and people had me going hither and thither, and I had to do radio shows. But I went because when I was a little boy in Washington Temple, he was the cop, just before he was a preacher. And he took care of Bishop Washington and helped to train a lot of our young people. I talked yesterday to a lady when we used to have junior church at Washington Temple. On Friday night, 7:30 to 9 was junior church. I was a junior pastor. I was about 11, 12, 13, all in there. And I'd preach every Friday night. We had a junior deacon board, junior trustee board, junior missionary. And Bishop Washington had structured it so we were learning leadership. So by me growing up a junior pastor, before I was a teenager, I knew how to deal with leadership and obligation. That's why everywhere I go, I talk about Bishop Washington and how people like Washington and Adam Clay Powell and Jesse Jackson affected me. Reverend Jackson was here the other week because I'm connected to something. And if you break your connection, you have no strength. Now, all of that to say, the March on Washington, which was a historic march, not because of the numbers, but because of the impact. It came as a result of a movement. As I was saying, Rosa Parks, 55. Well, Rosa Parks sitting in the front of the bus in 1955 was a year after Thurgood Marshall and them won the Supreme Court decision in 54. All this is one continuity. That's why what I'm trying to get y'all to understand is y'all got to be in time to be on time. 54, Supreme Court decision. 55, Rosa Parks sits down in front of the bus. They boycott Montgomery for a year. That's why I keep telling you, all of you microwave activists, don't cook up a movement, just warm up, get out there, yell 3 slogans and gone. From 56, when they ended the boycott, students around the South started doing freedom rides to integrate or desegregate interstate travel. And they were beaten. John Lewis was one of them. Many of them beaten for the right to sit where they wanted on a Greyhound bus. Inspired by Rosa Parks. Now, they were a different manifestation in the same tradition. Dr. King never was a freedom rider. He didn't get on a bus. They were the young students. But they complemented what he did. Movements complement each other. They called in for a Civil Rights Act where they wanted federal law that made it against the law to discriminate in interstate travel. They said, if the Congress won't do it, we'll come to Washington and petition the Congress to put through a bill to make laws against interstate travel. That's what they called the March on Washington. A. Philip Randolph, Roy Wilkins, head of NACP, Whitney Young, head of Urban League, on and on. Dr. King, SCLC, which was the church-based civil rights group like this one. In the middle of organizing the march, in June of '63, they killed Medgar Evers in Mississippi. Medgar Evers had been in Mississippi trying to register blacks to vote. They were trying to not keep blacks from voting. He drove home one night, voter registration forms on his car seat, stepped out the car in his driveway. Man blew his brains out in his driveway. 3 kids inside, beautiful wife inside. He laid down in the driveway and died, fighting to give us the right to vote. It was that tragedy that helped bring even more numbers to Washington. That's why, Kevin, folks say, well, y'all got a lot of crowd because George Floyd got killed. The original march was knowing how you turn tragedy into strategy. Reason why a lot of y'all don't know how to deal with that is because you ain't never been in no movement. They came 250,000 to get a Civil Rights Act. They did not come to Washington just to hear speeches. They came to Washington to speak and mobilize and organize to get legislation. If you don't change legislation, you are not doing anything of significance. Toward the end of the afternoon, they put Dr. King up. They wanted him to be last because he was the preacher, better speaker, and mobilizer. Many of the people began to head to the buses because they had to get home. You got to remember now, '63. They came to Washington by bus. Many of them could not stop on the road and use a public bathroom because it was segregation all the way until they got past the Mason-Dixie line. They couldn't stop in a restaurant. They had greasy paper bags with greasy fried chicken that they had to ride and wait and eat it cold because they couldn't stop at a Howard Johnson on the road because blacks wasn't allowed. They couldn't even stop and use a public toilet because they were not allowed to use the bathrooms that whites used. But they came anyhow. They came with segregated toilets, segregated restaurants, segregated everything because they wanted to what? Break the law of segregation. So they said, we got to get back to our buses and head back south. Somebody said, well, wait a minute, I know how to keep the crowd. And they put Mahalia Jackson up to sing. And she sang, I've been buked, and I've been scorned. And after her, Dr. King came. As Dr. King was talking about the legislation they wanted and talking about America had given blacks, he used the term Negro then, a check that had bounced in the Bank of Justice. And that we come to Washington to cash the check and to redeposit the check, which was reparations. Why are we at Lincoln Memorial? Because 100 years ago, in 1863, you promised, Mr. Lincoln, with the Emancipation Proclamation, that we'd be equal and free. I'm trying to give you all the historic part of it because of tomorrow. That's the reason the march wasn't at the Jefferson Memorial. It wasn't at the Washington Monument, because they didn't promise us nothing. But Lincoln promised. And that's why the march on Washington Day, y'all go to Lincoln Memorial, don't even ask yourself why we at Lincoln Memorial. You'll walk around the reflecting pole reflecting nothing. In that movement, from Medgar Evers' blood to the sacrifice is where the March on Washington happened. And it began to move. John Kennedy was president. It began to move the Senate and the Congress for the '64 Civil Rights Act. But let me tell you something, you can't have one march and it's all over. Because a couple of months after the March on Washington is when they bombed that church in Birmingham and killed those 4 girls. See, a lot of y'all, that's why it's so important we train these young folk here. A lot of y'all think, well, wait a minute. We won the George Floyd case, ain't it all over? They had the March on Washington and had the bill going through Congress and kill those little girls. You're going to continue to face challenges, and if you're not in it for the long run, then you need to get out the way and let some long-distance runners run this race. So we commemorate that tomorrow. But as I said tonight on the show, Martin III and I and his wife, Andrea Waters King, going to talk about the state of the race. Right now, we have seen in the last several weeks, this Biden administration, they passed a climate and tax bill, which is good. But we want to make sure that the black community that has been disproportionately impacted gets a disproportionate amount of those climate change funds. The toxic waste dumps are majority in our community. That's why there is a higher rate of asthma among black kids than others. It's not genetic, it is environmental. And if you don't vote for people that will go in and confront that, then you will continue to raise children that has a higher percentage of asthma. And you run around with babies in your house, talk about I don't vote, while your kids are choking on toxic air. Going to substandard schools, going to hospitals that don't have the personnel they use. And you run around bragging about how ignorant you are. If you're that stupid, don't tell nobody. At least keep it a secret. I told y'all the other week, everything you do is decided by people in office. Food you eat has to be approved by the Food and Drug Administration. Otherwise, you can't put it in the supermarket. I told them 2 weeks ago, Senator Parker, the clothes you wear, the apparel has to be approved to be sold. You sitting up with some approved underwear, talking about you don't vote. I'm being nice because we on radio and TV. But if I wasn't on radio and TV, I'd say the drawers you wear was approved by elected officials. So if you're going to have that much to say about me, I'm going to have something to say about who you going to be. We are today, one of the reasons why I'm so committed to Reverend W. Franklin Richardson, our chairman of the board here at NAN, but who also chairs the Conference of National Black Churches, on this fight against COVID and this fight about dealing with all of these COVID problems, is that now you got monkeypox. We are just 11 to 13% of the population. We are 27% of the people diagnosed with monkeypox, and only 10% of the people getting it. 10% of the people getting the vaccine. And unless you have something like the Conference of National Black Churches, black folk won't get the resources. And you run around talking about, I don't know about getting the vaccine, while everybody else is getting vaccinated. And by everybody else, when they got polio here, monkeypox here, COVID here. And you run around not voting for people that will make sure you got health insurance to take care of your condition. We looked this week, after much pressure from many places, Biden decided to finally do something about student debt. Now, right away the right wing comes out and criticizes about student debt. How you gonna just give people, I worked my way through. First of all, half of the folks talking, this Congresswoman Green, this guy in Florida, Gates, all of them had PPP loans that was forgiven by the government. If you believe in paying your debt, then pay back your PPP. Second of all, people talk about, I worked my way, others should be able to work their way. You should not want folk to have to suffer like you suffer. Thirdly, there is again a disproportionate. The $10,000 that they give it, $20,000 per household, is only a deposit when you deal with the racial breakdown. Right. I brought the numbers. Black folks have an average of $53,000 in student debt, where whites only have an average of $28,000. Say that again. The average black college student debt is $53,000. The average white, $28,000. Why? Because the average white has different economic status than us. So therefore, we need all the debt forgiveness we can get. We need the 10,000, the 20,000, and we need Congress to do some more. Why? Because you cannot build black wealth when you have a debt there that affects your credit, that affects you going to buy property, that affects you building a business. I keep telling you, there is nothing applaudable about militant ignorance. That a hashtag, Ashley. Militant ignorance. I ain't into politics. I want to free the land. I'm going to build a black Wall Street. You ain't going to build nothing if we do not have the political power to do it.
That's right. That's right.
Quit playing with our people. You can't build a business if you can't get a business zoning. Quit playing with people's emotion. Free the land while you paying rent. Let's talk like we got good sense. Respect our people to give them the truth. Our wealth has been crippled by student loans that affect our credit, where we can't go to the banks and even get a mortgage for the house we live in. And you talking about Biden shouldn't forgive it, he should forgive that and more. You got folks that get all the way up in their 50s and 60s, still paying off their student loans. Some even much older than that, up there with Hardy's age. And they went to school in log cabins, but they still got student loans. You didn't think I was going to let you go today, did you? So we are up against a spirit of people that are just wicked. Let me tell you something. That's why Paul said in the Bible, we battle not against flesh and blood. It's wickedness in high places. It is wicked to strap people with loans that you know will cripple their ability to be self-sufficient. It's wicked. It's wicked for you to open up a university, call it Trump University, take folk money, don't educate anybody, but then you come out about student loans with your corrupt self. How can the founder of a corrupt Trump University talk about student loans other than wickedness? It's wicked to become the president of the United States, and because you lose the election, you take classified, super classified, high classified information and bring it to your house like it is your property. What are you doing with all this classified stuff? Are you making deals? You got golf tournaments financed by the Saudis. Yes, I'm suspicious as to what Trump was doing. You got spies' names and other names in them documents. So what do you need them at your house for? Well, he didn't know what he had. He can't read classified. He can't see highly classified. And if anybody else had done that, they would be facing a court and jail. But you got people that are saying, even if he indicted, I'm voting for him, because it's wickedness in high places. You got to be wicked to see diseases all over the country, and you will decide which communities you're going to put the remedy to the disease. You got to be wicked to pull jobs out of a neighborhood so the kids have no job, no training, no programs, no recreation. Schools don't work. And then when they go in the street and turn on each other, you put guns in their hand. They can't afford nothing, but for somehow you can get a pistol and shoot people up in the community and you call them savage when you took everything from them and then armed them to shoot each other. Nobody but wicked folk would do that. Then you pump music in the ear to make them act like savages. I tell them all the time, Reverend Cooper, Nebuchadnezzar used music because it makes you culturally accept degradation. And if they can make you comfortable with being degraded, then they can degrade you with no problem at all. A friend of mine called me last week, said, Reverend Al, so-and-so, hot artists in town, they'd like to meet you. You coming? No. Well, they want to talk to you. Well, we can meet in private. I ain't taking no photo. You ain't putting it on Instagram because you sitting up there calling people the N-word, the B-word. I'm not sitting around photographing with you, doing a selfie. You need to get your selfie together. We fought to be respected. We fought for our self-concept. Cooper said it today that we all somebody. Jesse made that slogan, I am somebody. How do we go from that to this degrading of ourselves now? Last conversation I had with James Brown before he died, about 2 weeks before he died. He said, Reverend, whatever you do, explain to me how I sung Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. Aretha sang Respect. Marvin Gaye sang What's Going On. And now y'all got black artists out there calling y'all niggas, hoes, and bees. How did that happen? And we act like, well, y'all just too old. No, we just too dignified and too self-respectful. It got nothing to do with age. It's got to do with agenda. I remember when I first came out against the N-word, Reverend Parker, Senator Parker, I made you a reverend.
I'll take the promotion.
Some of the artists got mad at me, some of my friends, still friends. They're going to have a meeting with me. We met at this record executive's house. If I call their names, all of you will know who they are. They're in their 50s now. They used to be the young artists. They're the old artists now. Well, we got a problem with you coming out against the N-word and all of that. And I explained about dignity and self-respect. They said, yeah, but you understand, we just kick it the way we see it. I said, no, you don't. You kick some things you see. You don't go in no studio and call nobody else out their name. So let me get this right. If you call or use a derogatory term about the Irish, hate speech. You use a derogatory term about Italians, hate speech. You use a derogatory term about Jews, hate speech. You use a derogatory term about gays, hate speech. You call blacks niggas, free speech. I mean, think about that. The only one you free to use a derogatory term is us. You can't be that stupid. They won't let you put a derogatory term in the brain of their children, but they'll let you change the psyche of our children. Because if a child thinks all they are is a nigger, or nothing but a hoe and a bee, they will grow up with no self-respect and no self-value because they've accepted that culturally. That's wickedness in high places. And they will give you every Grammy Award you want to beat your own people down. Give you a Grammy to degrade your mammy. and you skinning and grin, just smiling. We have got to fight like we never fought before. From political to cultural. That's why this is a black church-based organization. In the black church was the first institution we owned and operated in this country. We got out of slavery, we didn't have nothing but our churches. But more than owning it is that there was standards and a moral code, even if we violated them in our personal life, we knew we were violating something. But when you have no values and no standards, then your communities end up with cab drivers being killed for no reason. Because there's no values. And you're left reckless. And you've been invaded by wickedness. I was reading this morning, Reverend Cooper, 1 Samuel 30th chapter, where David had come back. And the Amalekites had come and invaded and taken captive his people. Even his wives. Bible said that they captured 2 of his wives. I'm not going to get into polygamy this week, so y'all relax. And they captured them, said they didn't kill them. They captured them. And David became outraged, angry, mad like we were about Amadou Diallo, about George Floyd, about Ahmaud Arbery. And he went down and prayed. First thing you got to do if you're going to fight these fights is you got to first put yourself in a spiritual set of mind. Because you can't fight wickedness unless you get the wickedness out of you. You can't fight wrong unless you got the right spirit. That's why I said put on the whole armor of God so we can withstand. You can't stand this by yourself. Don't act like you're strong enough by yourself. You got to have some spiritual power to go up against these people. They're going to call you names. They're going to write nasty stuff in the newspaper. But if you covered by something else, they can shoot their best shot, but you can keep going anyhow. Bible said David prayed. And they went down and they saw this young boy. He said, who are you? Where are you from? Well, I'm an Egyptian. Well, what happened to you? Well, my master left me out here. I said, well, where are they? Well, they over there. He said, if you can show us where they are, we're going in there to get back our people, my wives, and others they captured. But they didn't run without a strategy. I want y'all to get this, I'll let you go. David said, we're going to go and get them at twilight. Why are you going to twilight? They don't think we coming at twilight. And twilight is dark out. Twilight, the sun hasn't risen. Twilight is before people done got up. I'm going to get them at twilight while they're sleeping. Because all of their strategies and all of their war plans don't matter when they sleep. I'm going to fight at twilight. That's why, Kevin Parker, I like to get up at twilight. I like to work out while y'all still sleeping because I'm trying to get all that toxic stuff out my head at twilight. And I'm telling you, twilight is coming. We can vote these people out. We can build back our communities. We can get these guns out. I'm ready to fight at twilight while they're sleeping, while they're resting, while they think they're in charge. There's a fight at twilight. Many of us are not prepared for the fight. We got a membership drive starting tomorrow in National Action Network. All over the country, people ought to go and join National Action Network. If you're ready, but if you ain't ready to fight, if you ain't ready for a twilight fight, don't join this organization. This organization ain't for punks. This organization ain't for those that tarry ignorance, but those that's ready to fight them, ready to stand up unapologetically and say, yes, I believe in having the political power to take care of educate my children and to get the guns out my neighborhood and to medicate my community properly. Yes, I ain't not going to apologize for saying that I was born in the image of God, and I'm not born to be your nigga. And I'm not going to bow to nobody but God. If you're ready to do that, then join National Action Network. If you're too scared to do that, go join something else. I need some Twilight fighters. Well, Reverend, do we have the numbers? Do we have the money? I don't know what we got. But I know if God be for me, it's more than the whole world against me. I serve a God that'll lock lions' jaws in the lion's den for Daniel. I serve a God that'll take heat out of the fire in the fiery furnace for Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. I serve a God that'll take Jesus off the cross and rise him on the third day. I don't need what you need. I don't need no AR-15. All I need is a slingshot, and I'll see you at the twilight. If God be for us, if God be for us, if God be for us, who can be against us? He promised never to leave me. He promised he wouldn't forsake me. He promised he'd make my enemies my footstool. He promised if I stand up, he'd hold me up. He promised he'd make a way out of no way. He promised he'd be food when I'm hungry. He promised he'd be water when I'm thirsty. He promised he'd be my rock, my sword and shield, my wheel in the middle of the wheel. I'm standing on his promises. I'm standing on his promises. I'm standing on his promises. Twilight, 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 twilight. I did not get a degree in theology. I didn't stay in Brooklyn College long enough to get my BA. But God blessed me to preach all over the world. Because I learned in Washington Temple as a little boy to use what I got to get what I want. And I may not be as polished as some of the theologically trained preachers. And I may not be as theatrical as some of the performative preachers. But this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. I'm going to shine it in Minnesota for George Floyd. I'm going to shine it in Brunswick, Georgia for Ahmaud Arbery. Or I shined it in Bensonhurst for Yusef Hawkins. I shined it in Howard Beach for Michael Griffin. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Oh, everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, gave it to me. I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, Jesus gave it to me. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Yes, this is the light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine. This is the light of mine. Gonna let it shine. This is the light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine.
Everybody's singing. Everybody's singing. Everybody's singing. Everybody's singing. Sing it like you mean it. Sing it like you mean it. Everybody's singing. Everybody's singing. Everybody's singing. One more time, y'all. One more time, y'all. One more time, y'all. I'm going to open the doors of the movement. We're starting a national membership drive tomorrow on the anniversary of the March on Washington, but you may be here this morning and not a member or have not renewed your membership to National Action Network. If you're here and have not joined or have not paid your dues this year, I want you to come forward. Now, people talk about, well, I don't know if I renewed or not. You know your birthday every year. You know if you ain't paid your membership in a year that you are due. Hello. You that are listening on Radio Land or watching us on television, you can join right now on the phone by calling at 1-877-626-4657, 1-877-626-4651, 1-877-626-4651. But if you're here, come on down to me and renew your membership or join this morning. Come on, everybody's singing. Come on. Everybody's singing. Everybody's singing. Sing it like you mean it. Sing it like you mean it. Sing it like you mean it. One more time, y'all. Sing it like you mean it. Everybody's singing. Yeah. One last time, y'all. One last time, y'all. Everybody's singing. All right, as we get ready to go off the air, I want to remind everyone in Radio Land, Television Land, that we're starting our membership drive tomorrow on the anniversary of the March on Washington. Go to www.nationalactionnetwork.net, www.nationalactionnetwork.net, and join and be a part of the Twilight fighters. It's Twilight time. It's folks that want to get up when others are asleep